Good afternoon, everyone, and thanks for joining us again today for the COPEC Daily Financial Wellness Webcast. Today is October 14th, and we're going to be talking about managing money and marriage with Rick Zwelling, who is a financial advisor, counselor, and real excited about having him with us today. To get into a little bit of disclosure, we've got that up here. You can view this. I've had it up here for a little bit, so you can view it here right now. Or you can also go to the COPEC website at copeceducation.org, and you can see it there as well. At the bottom, there's a disclosure section. And we talk a little bit about COPEC speakers, the board, affiliated organizations, including myself, which is, I'm president of COPEC. I host these programs. And so we have some information about my company on there as well. So just to make sure that that full disclosure is out. With no further ado, we're going to go ahead and talk with Rick today about the managing money in marriage. So, hey, Rick, I got a question. I don't see the video. Do you see me okay?
Jay, I see you perfectly well.
Great, excellent. So thank you for joining us, and real excited about having you. I think this is such a big topic, and whether it's this topic, which is money in marriage, and unfortunately, we talked earlier about this Friday or next Friday, you're going to be doing one of the Financial Wellness Series lectures on, managing money during a divorce. So it's kind of like both ends of the spectrums. But we're going to keep a very optimistic perspective here as we start out, right?
I think that's a good approach.
Exactly right. Well, this is something, being in the financial advising industry and portfolio management, things like that, it all comes down to really managing your goals, but also managing life events. Many times these life events are things that are many times on the negative side, illnesses, losing of a job, but some of these are real exciting times, like marriage. And so I love the fact that we're going to be able to talk about that and break it down a little bit more today. And really, it's not just a foundation from an individual perspective, but honestly, and correct me if I'm wrong, it's a great, very important foundation for any marriage to make sure that we approach this and handle it from the start. So what are we going to talk about today?
Really, Jay, we got some things to talk about, but so much of this, I think, is about feelings and attitudes, as opposed to some of my talks are more factual. So there's a lot of slides and a lot of data. This one's really about more feelings and how people feel about it. I know we have some people online. I'd rather let's have them unmute, because I think this is going to be more of a general discussion, so we can all learn from that. So from my background, my wife and I, we've been married 35 years. In fact, actually next week will be our 35th anniversary. And, marriage and money, they're two very emotional aspects, two very emotional topics. Marriage is emotional, obviously, to relationships. And money can be very emotional too. And we have, by and large, a society that doesn't talk a lot about money, doesn't teach a lot about money. And so you have two people getting together, and the key is really, there's really only one answer that I'm going to give today, and that's communicate. That is the absolute key. If there's no other takeaway, communicate about money. Because people go into money, especially younger people, you have, say, student loan debts. The debts can really drag down someone's options. So when contemplating marriage, I think one of the main things to talk about, it does not the only thing, but a key area is to talk about money and not to be afraid about it. How were you raised with money? How's your financial situation now? What's your money knowledge? Do you have student loan debts? How do you manage your credit cards? Does it bring you anxiety? How do you feel about spending? And unfortunately, money issues are one of the top reasons for arguments in a marriage, and also one of the top reasons for divorce. So the earlier one can have about these conversations and have these conversations, the better, because you got to be open about it, Jay. Geez, how long have you been married?
Yeah. I just had my 20th. So, and work really hard to make sure that stuff's out there. But real important, you made a comment there that I think is really critical, which is, you know, the idea that money is such a base foundation. And when you go through and work with clients that you work with, how often does the issue come up when you're dealing with a couple that's either planning on getting married or is already married and they're earlier enough on where maybe one of the spouses has a lot of student debt, or maybe they've had a bankruptcy, or maybe they have a lot of credit card debt that, I mean, that they may go on vacation and have a great time. They may have great sense of humor. They may have this, they may have that, but that thing is there and it's going to bubble up and it's going to create strife. How often does that come up? Because it's the elephant in the room, isn't it?
Yeah, a good amount of frequency actually, and not necessarily just younger people getting married, but let's say older people and maybe second marriages. You know, I had one client that second marriage for each of them in their 50s, and boy, their spending was out of control, and it created so much stress in the relationship. So the ideal is put it on the table. The earlier, the better. And maybe someone does have a lot of, let's say, student loan debt. All right, you work around it. Well, let's talk about, okay, we're going to be strapped, or we're going to devote a certain amount of our resources for X number of years. We may have to put off buying a house. We may have to put off this, but let's get this under control. But the key is putting everything on the table and then see how it goes. I mean, this is a very important aspect of a relationship. And so, and it's also probably something that gets very little time that people talk about it honestly. I know that with my wife and I, we never had a lot of debt. She would have a tendency to maybe carry on credit card debt, carry a balance. It wasn't a lot, but once we started getting together and we started sharing our finances, whenever it was possible, which was most of the time, luckily, we always paid off our credit cards. And we talked about our credit card debt. We talked about other debts. And again, having that communication and sharing, it's not just the facts too, it's sharing attitudes. Maybe someone grew up in a house that was under tremendous financial stress. Parents had to change jobs, or there was divorce in there and people were, having to move from house to house. Or maybe someone grew up with, an abundance of wealth with having no accountability. It's really the whole range. If you have it and you've always had it, you might not know what it's like to go without it. You can always get what you want. You can pull out the credit card or write a check. And so I think having these conversations, Jay, don't you think? You've got clients too that are, having financial stresses. They come to you, they want to do financial planning. They think they're okay. All of a sudden, they see things are a little bit tight. How is that going to impact the relationship, right?
Yeah, it's interesting because this is the reason why it's great to have these conversations with you, because we primarily deal with people after they've been able to start saving and doing these things. And usually where we find there's a crisis or a struggle is kind of like you said before with a second marriage, and not just a second marriage, but you've got these family dynamics, right? Not just financially, but children and whatever it might be that is unique. Which house do you live in? I mean, there's a lot of things like that. But one of the things, and this is really important, and I don't know if this is the right time to mention this, but I'm going to mention it right now since it's coming to me, is when older couples get remarried, or when they are, because the stress that I see more is for preparing for retirement, more so than trying to get out of debt. Now, maybe they're trying to get out of debt, but their income is higher and the debt may be there, so they're trying to pay it off, but it's usually in somewhat of a positive cash flow. And people don't understand how critical having a good handle and habit of their managing their expenses, budgets, things like that. Because one of the problems that I see is as that that we always joke around. It's the light at the end of the tunnel called retirement, right? And it's getting brighter and brighter as we get there. And one spouse usually panics quicker than the other,
Yeah.
right?
Right.
One spouse panics 10 years out. The other spouse says, we got plenty of time. And so that's usually where the panic is. And what a lot of people don't understand is that as you get closer and closer, usually you have a false sense of security because you're in such a positive cash flow. So you might be bringing in 150% of what you need to spend, but your expenses might be inflated because you have that 150%. And when you retire, maybe you need to pull back to 80% to make the plan work. And people are not in a 40, they haven't been in a 40-year habit to do that, right?
I also agree. And also, I think, again, if nothing else, the sooner that these conversations can happen in a relationship, the better. And, like I said, like retirement, yeah, you have a couple that, getting towards retirement, but talking about the spending, is the spending going to change? You got the income, but you and I both know that, if you have all this time in terms of retirement, you have all this time, odds are expenses could go up, and so there's all these things, so newer relationships also, how will expenses be handled? Because in some couples, one person, they each have their own checking. One couple I talked with, each had their own checking, and they each contributed to a third checking account to cover the bills. And, it's all how it works. From my perspective, it was like, well, do you trust each other? Do you see being married for a long time? And if the answer is yes, then maybe think about just putting it all into one. Now, everyone's a little bit different. Now, second marriage is a little bit different, or maybe newer relationships could be different. But, also keeping it simple, I think that's important. Having multiple buckets of money can complicate things. And also, okay, who's responsible? Here's another area, Jay. Who's responsible for paying bills, or what bills? Because let's say that one is like, kind of anal retentive. Man, I make sure this bill is paid off, 3 days before it's due. And the other person is, I'll get to it eventually. And so there's late fees. It's really spending habits. It's how expenses are going to be handled, and getting into that comfort level. Because keep in mind, let's say that a newer couple right now renting an apartment, one is really on top of the finances. Their finances, one's maybe not as great a sense of urgency. Then when it comes time to buy a home, they pull a credit report. All of a sudden, borrower A, has got like 770 score. Borrower B is 620, but you need both incomes. And so these kind of things can generate some tension in the relationship.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And one of the reasons why I was bringing up before about the expenses is start early, start training early. There's this general rule out there that says start investing in your retirement plan early, right? Everybody says it. If you have a 401k, put money in. If you get whatever it is, right? And here's the problem. Regardless of how you dealt with finances on your own, when you get married, you're not on your own anymore. You're accountable to each other. The sooner you attack that elephant in the room, the dramatically higher chance you have of not having a divorce due to finances and not reaching your goals, whatever those goals are, because you're not on the same page. And by the way, how long's a honeymoon attitude last, right? You're in the honeymoon phase for 5 years, let's say. Well, isn't that the best time when you think the highest of each other and the best of each other to have these complicated conversations so that by the time the honeymoon period is waning, the financial stress and that elephant in the room is not getting bigger and bigger and scarier and scarier. You dealt with it when you're in the right frame of mind and you're pleased with each other, and therefore you can have these discussions that might normally be a little complicated.
Well, Jay, I would like to think that my wife still thinks fairly well of me after all these years. I know
Yeah.
she's well of her, you know. But
Good
no,
habits, long term.
it,
And you said that you're the boss in the house when she lets you, right? I mean, it's one of those things.
my favorite line in the movie is the man's the head of the house, but the woman is the neck, and the neck turns the head.
Yeah, yeah.
But also add in other things. Maybe there's going to be children at some point, or one to buy a home, and just again, the emphasis is having these conversations and also bringing out the emotions. There could be a lot of fear and uncertainty. And for those who are listening to this, feel free to open up and pitch in. I mean, this is kind of a group discussion. If you have certain attitudes or maybe some challenges that you're having in a relationship regarding money, we'll call this a mini therapy session if you want. So take advantage.
And real quick, that's a good point. We're on a webinar base where we're not actually turning on microphones, but please send a chat, make any comment, we'll share it, through the chat or through the Q&A.
Good point. All right. So one other point I have is that a key thing is to review everything together. And I tell you that my wife, I typically I don't make the decisions, but I implement a lot of what we talk about. But I'm very proactive about going over our financial situation for better or worse, so that my wife is at least informed about what's going on and there's not surprises. If things are going well, we go over them. If things are not going well, we sit down and we do a budget. And I think having a budget, most people don't keep budgets, don't have written budgets. So that alone, let's say someone comes from a family where that they're really on top of it and they always have a budget, and someone never has a budget. So it's making those things mix, but reviewing the important financial aspects, certainly current cash flow, current debts, that kind of thing, but also retirement. Have a discussion of are each of you in a 401k? How much are you contributing? How much money's coming in? Insurance. So many people are underinsured, and that's a serious discussion to have, is about life insurance and even auto insurance and home insurance. Are you properly insured? And you want to have these discussions and be on board together, as well as investments. How do you feel? Like Jay, this is your age. How do you feel about risk? And how can you manage the risk? And if you're not comfortable coming up with those decisions on your own, seeking out a professional when it comes to the investments, insurance, seeking out that. If it's a matter of needing a third party to work on communication, you work out maybe with a financial coach. But it's having those proper discussions about all the financial aspects of a relationship. I mean, that, and also another thing is wills. Do you have a will? Does each of you have a will that you're properly in there, and all the beneficiaries? I mean, all these little details that, if not attended to, could create problems in the relationship, or something happens in it. That's when some of the real problems can come up. So it's better to have these conversations on the earlier side.
Yeah, and you made me think of something that's real important that we deal with a lot. I'm sure you do as well. And this comment is not to promote that everybody needs to go out and get an advisor. That's not what I'm saying.
Right.
But one of the things that we find that is a challenge, and I kind of meant it before about the urgency with retirement. Hey, we need to think about it. We're running out of time. And the other person says, we got plenty of time. Or I want to spend it while I can, versus, no, I need to worry about, to me is the concept of having good discussions. It is in some instances, it is easy for people to talk about money. In many marriages, this is not a few, this is many, people find it difficult to have a financial discussion. It is not that it's finances are hard. It is that something takes us off of the focus of what the plan is, which is roles, who's going to do what, who has what, how we, all those things, what are our goals. Sometimes we get into those modes where it's like, well, you had that student debt, and it's what, and it sometimes isn't a positive conversation, or somebody steps away from the conversation, whatever it is. sometimes it's good to have an advocate to manage the conversation, to be a guide through that process, to make sure the communication is healthy and make sure. Now, again, I'm not saying like a counselor, right? But many financial advisors and consultants like you and I we do spend a lot of time with that. So it's important to make sure that you have real discussions, that you talk about what are the roles, what are the goals, who's going to write who's going to take care of budgeting. One of the things we have is sometimes we have one person who is an engineer and loves spreadsheets, right? Yep. Well, that person is great for reviewing projections, financial independence. The other person may really like to just do the books, and it isn't a male, female, it is none of those things, but sometimes they talk about who's going to do what. Maybe we do it together. But having those discussions is critical for everybody, because there is no one right way to do anything, especially in this world. It's what works for you guys, whoever this couple is. And last thing I want to say is there are a lot of people that don't like to talk about finances, or it confuses them. And they're the smartest person in the room when it comes to, maybe they're a scientist, maybe they're an educator, maybe they're a whatever, but it just doesn't click. And it's the job of everybody to bring that around in a full sense. It doesn't mean that we're not capable or we're not smart. It just means maybe we don't think the same way in that category versus another.
Yeah, it's so important. And also it can be so emotional based on one's experiences, because everybody has different experiences. You talk about the analytical, the engineer, but also on the arts side too. It's like, whatever, the money will come. I don't worry about it until it doesn't come. So, we're saying the same thing, but it's still important to emphasize to have that communication, learn together, and bring it together. Also, one point I want to bring up is before the marriage, because there may be some people who are thinking about getting married that don't overspend on the wedding. Okay, because I think I don't have any statistic, but there's a certain percent of couples that go into a marriage in debt because they overspent on the wedding. And so I think that is a important part of the picture pre-marriage, and it's part of the financial discussion. Where's the money going to come from? Because to go into a marriage with too much debt, it's tough. It's a tough way to start a relationship. And so again, having those discussions and allowing each other maybe some mad money too. Hey, each month we're each going to take an allowance. We'll say, I'll use the term allowance, of $100, $150, $200. That way we've got it. And once we spend it, it's gone. We don't have to worry about it. And just, it's that communication, because that's really key. The way I look at it is relationships, the relationships they're like an onion. You just kind of peel a layer at a time. And the finance is part of that relationship. It's part of that ongoing getting to know each other better. And again, the sooner one can have those kind of discussions, and if there are differences of opinion or differences of experiences, it's good to have those earlier and deal with the emotion. Because again, money is emotional, relationships are emotional, and the sooner the better. Because if you're going to get married, most people would think get married with the ideal of it's for a lifetime, it's for better or worse. So whatever one can do to have that, because things do get better and things do get worse at times. So you want to make sure you're as on the same page as possible. It's a big step.
Yeah, and you bring up a really good point about just even the wedding, right? As far as, it is a once in a lifetime event, and you balance what's a good balance between excessive versus a nice wedding. And I would also caveat that or mention that one of the other things that I see is that sometimes people purchase a house maybe a year too soon. And that's an example primarily of they haven't stabilized their budget and they haven't built up an emergency fund. They go out and they hurry up and buy a house, and then they have a problem with the roof, or they have something go wrong, or maybe one of them loses a job. They haven't built up the emergency fund. I mean, a lot of these foreclosures is because people have not nobody expects somebody to save up $300,000 before they buy a house. I think of the old movie, Miracle. No, not Miracle. With Jimmy Stewart, who could, you don't want to wait to save up the money to buy the house. Otherwise, you can't spend it with your family, right? So, of course, mortgages and things are very normal. So you need to do that. But you need to build up enough of a savings to handle all of those cash flow needs that can come up. Not necessarily saying they will come up, but they can come up so that you don't fall victim to the, wow, I didn't see that coming, right? Because I didn't see that coming. I thought cash flow wise, I would have been fine, but I lost my job and we had to replace the roof and we're going into foreclosure.
Well, and also, let's say that one partner is pushing to get a house, another one is hesitant, but to, satisfy the first one to get the house, and there's some setbacks because life gives you setbacks. All of a sudden, it's like, well, I told you so. So it's having those conversations and also like playing out worst case scenarios or negative scenarios. We get in the house, for example, the timing of that conversation is interesting because we have a son and daughter-in-law in contract to buy a home, and they had the discussion. Okay, you're going to put X amount down. How much do you have left in the bank? Because things happen. If something, the roof, it needs a new roof, or the work, he's starting a new job. So you're having those discussions and listening to the other person, and maybe for a while take a conservative view and step back. It's all, as long as the decision's made, you're on the same page. Hey, for better or worse, we're doing this. And if it turns out there's some setbacks, we're in it together, not a I told you so, because it just adds stress to a marriage. And there's enough stressors out there in life.
Exactly right. Exactly right. Hey, this has been a really good conversation, Rick. I really enjoy this. I have, let me move this over here real quick. For those of you that are listening in, if you have any questions or concerns, feel free to reach out to Rick or myself. We'd be happy to help you any way we can. But hopefully this gives you a little bit of insight in some of the thoughts that maybe we haven't thought of before. If you're going through this, and again, remember, this is not just new marriage. This is, maybe after 20 or 30 years, but you're dealing with some of these goals that you haven't focused on before. So there's a lot of stuff that goes into this. And Rick, if you have any parting, maybe words or words of advice, and we appreciate everybody joining us today, and we'll let you have the last word here.
One word: communicate. That's really it.
That's a great way to end that. So for those of you attending, thank you so much for joining us. Please continue to join us daily. I am not sure what we're going to be talking about tomorrow. I think it'll be planning, but it'll be a good program, I'm sure. Please join us. And thank you so much. We appreciate you, and we'll talk to you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you, Rick. Appreciate your time.
Pleasure, y'all. Thank you.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.